Hey, welcome back to our series on getting to know the gifts of nature in wintertime. In today's video, we're going to be diving deep into the gifts of the trees, but before we do that, I just want to do a quick recap from last video and share a couple other teachings to kind of build on our lessons from the birds. Now, in the last video, I shared this story about a class that I ran and how we had a guy show up at very little time in the wilderness, I'll say, and didn't know a lot about nature. And after a few days of experimenting with this concept of baseline, the last day of the course, the birds actually told him that there was a storm coming, and he was just blown away that he was actually able to know that it was about to start raining because of the birds that were behaving. And I find that so inspiring as well. So this other story I wanted to share just kind of shows another example of the way that this information can be super practical and useful for us. So this is another past student of mine, and I ran into him one day and he was all excited to see me. And he was like, "Chris, I gotta tell you this story that happened the other day." So he's like, "I was out for a walk in what we call the back 40, this big chunk of woods." And he's like, "I'm walking along the trail and I hear what I think is a clump of alarms going from inside of the forest. And I have this thought, oh, I wonder if that's what Chris is talking about. I'm gonna quietly sneak in there and see if there's anything going on." So long story short, he quietly sneaks into the forest and he realizes there's a bunch of people playing in the middle of the forest. Now, he couldn't see them, he couldn't hear them, but the birds told him they were there. And he was just like absolutely mind-blowing that he was able to know there was something going on in the forest without seeing and hearing it, just from knowing what the birds were saying. This is the power of bird language, and it's an absolute game changer when it comes to our relationship with the natural world, extending our awareness, and it really just enriches the experiences that we can have in the outdoors when we really dive into it. Now, I want you to imagine yourself for a second out at one of your favorite places out in nature. Imagine yourself walking down a trail. This could be in an urban park, it could be in a more remote wilderness setting, it doesn't really matter. But just imagine this for a second. You're walking down the trail and all of a sudden you hear a bird call. But you now know that a call is not just a call, that it has meaning. And this bird call you identify as likely an alarm. So you stop and wait. And a couple moments later, suddenly you see somebody and their dog walking down the trail in front of you. Now, without seeing or hearing that person, you knew what was about to happen next. Can you see how valuable this is? Whether it's a predator like a black bear or a cougar or a mountain lion, just knowing that there's another person out there, it's just so neat and so empowering to have that kind of awareness out on the landscape. The flip side, it could be like that second story where you're walking through the woods and you hear that alarm call and you think, oh, I wonder what's going on there. And maybe you sneak into the woods a little bit and you have the opportunity to watch a wild animal without it noticing you there. Maybe it's a wolf or a coyote or a red fox that's hunting, and now you're able to watch it, and you never would have seen that if you didn't know how to interpret the bird language in the first place. This is a lifelong journey, but it's so empowering, and as I said, it really just transforms the way we move through the woods. So anyways, let's shift from birds into today's topic, which is building our relationship with the trees. And just like as we get to know a bird, or we get to know a human for that matter, the more we get to know it, the more information it actually relays to us. The deeper that relationship becomes, the more they're able to teach us, the more we're able to observe. Well, the same actually goes for trees. And you might not think about it like this, but actually every single tree is a unique individual. And there's going to be common traits and properties for the family of trees, like the grouping, like say maple. But then there's also common properties or traits for an individual tree that might differ from a tree growing in this habitat versus that one, even though they're both maple trees. This level of depth of relationship and knowledge with trees, again, just completely changes what they reveal to us. It makes us more effective in the outdoors, it helps our survival, and again, it just enriches the experiences that we have. So let me ask you a question when it comes to making fires and campfires. Now, if you've never made a fire before, don't worry, just listen in because you'll probably still learn something. But for those of you that have spent a fair bit of time making fires, I want you to think about this for a second. When you make a fire, do you think about what type of wood you're actually putting on the fire if you want to boil water to make tea versus if you want to make dinner? How about if you're making a fire to entertain some friends around and you want to hang out and you want there to be very little smoke and very little sparks? Do you actually change the type of wood you use based on what you want to do with the fire? This is such a fun one to play with because as you build your relationships with the trees, you'll realize that different woods have very different properties. And learning these properties can make us so much more effective with our campfires. It also can really impress our friends with just how efficient our skills are in the outdoors. Now, I could teach a multi-day course just on this topic of the properties of campfire woods and building relationship with trees through fire. And that's a little above and beyond this. And I do this, we dive into this deep in some of my other courses. But for today's video, I'll just give you a little bit of a kind of a sneak peek of where that's going. And then I'll also give you an activity so you can go out on your own and start to figure this out. Now the basics of this is to understand the difference between a conifer tree and a deciduous tree. And the real kind of quick answer is that our coniferous trees, one, they're usually softer woods, and two, they're full of what we call volatile oils, which means they burn really hot and fast. But the softer woods actually mean the coals burn out quicker. So if I light a fire out of conifer branches, let's say cedar, I'm gonna get a lot of heat really, really quick, and the coals aren't gonna last very long. Cedar is phenomenal if you wanna boil water fast or warm up really fast. But if you wanna cook a stew or cook a steak, something that's gonna take a lot longer, you might wanna consider using a deciduous tree, which are hardwood trees. They won't throw as much heat right off the bat as the cedar, but the coals are gonna last exponentially longer, and they're gonna do a way better job of cooking your meal over the long run. So there's just a little glimpse of where that can go. Now it's so much more minute than that. And near the end of this video, I'm gonna share an activity so you can start learning that and really crafting your skills as a fire maker. But again, just imagine how much this starts to change your relationship and your effectiveness in the outdoors when you start to have that kind of relationship with trees and that kind of relationship with fire. Now, a great starting point with this is identification. And learning to ID trees in the wintertime particularly can be really challenging. So I'm gonna share some of my top tips to help you start to increase your tree ID really fast. But I also just wanna throw out there that learning their name is just really the starting point, because when you meet a new person and they tell you your name, how much do you really know about them? Not very much. Knowing the name white pine doesn't tell me anything about its medicinal value, doesn't tell me about what kind of habitat it grows in, doesn't tell me what it's telling me about direction or the landscape or a million different other things. White pine is full of all kinds of teachings that are different than spruce, which are different than maple. So I need to actually build a relationship with the white pine for it to start sharing those other teachings with me. Now I made an actual printable scavenger hunt that you can take out in the landscape. You can do this on your own. You can also do this with your kids if you have them. It's a great one if you're an outdoor educator, feel free to use this. But this is a tree ID scavenger hunt, and it's based on 5 basic patterns that you can find basically anywhere in the world. And the one side we talk about the deciduous ones, and the other side we talk about the coniferous ones. So your challenge is to print this off, go out into the woods, and see if you can find a tree that matches each of these 5 patterns. And I'll break them down for you really quick right now. So first we'll chat about the coniferous trees. The coniferous trees are what we call cone-bearing trees. So they have like the pine cone or the spruce cone. So they have a hard casing around their cone. Most of them are what we call evergreen, meaning they keep their needles year round. Now, quick little bonus question. If you know the answer to this, share it in the comments below. But there is one conifer, at least where I live in the northeastern part of North America, that actually loses its needles. So it's a deciduous conifer. So if you know that one, throw it in the bonus section. But let's chat about some basic patterns right now. So the first one we're going to chat about is what we call clustered needles. So this means that when I go to the base of this needle, there's actually 2 needles coming from the same base there. And this is a red pine here. When I go over to the white pine and I go to the base, there's actually 5 needles coming from the same central point. So clustered needles is one of the patterns you're going to look for. And where I live, that puts it in the pine family. The next pattern we're going to look at is single needles. And there's a whole bunch of trees that fit into this. But if I go down to the base, it's just 1 needle coming out of the base. So spruce, balsam fir, hemlock, Douglas fir if you're out on the west coast, single needle ones. There's the next pattern. And then the third one we're going to look at is scaly. And this is a great example of this is the eastern white cedar around here, where the branches really look like scales. So first part of your scavenger hunt, you can look at your conifers, group them into one of those 3 patterns, which now means there's a lot less trees you need to look through, and it's going to really help you if you use a field guide. Now we'll move on to the deciduous. And deciduous trees basically are the trees with the big broad leaves that lose them every wintertime. And the 2 patterns that we're going to look at there are opposite, meaning the branches come out side to side, or alternate, meaning they're staggered. And fortunately, again, in eastern North America, there's not very many trees that actually have opposite arrangement. So this is a maple tree right now, and you can see by opposite, there's branches coming opposite from each other out of the stem the whole way up. Now you might notice a spot here where there isn't an opposite branch because that one's broken off or it's died for whatever reason. So just because you find the odd branch that isn't opposite, make sure you look to see that there's some with opposite. An alternate branching tree will never have an opposite section. An opposite might have the odd one that doesn't have a branch on the other side. The acronym that we use for this is MAD HORSE. Again, MAD HORSE. And if you walk through the letters of that, the M is for maple, the A is for ash or the ash family, the D is for the dogwood family, and then horse stands for horse chestnuts and honeysuckles. And there's a bunch of species in those groupings. So I'll go through that one more time. M is for maples, A is for ash, D is for dogwood, and horse is for horse chestnut and honeysuckles. And within the honeysuckles, there's a bunch of shrubs that are in the viburnum family, things like elderberry and yeah, a whole bunch of different viburnums in there that you can kind of explore. High bush cranberry, things of that nature. But just putting into the opposite means you can rule out a whole bunch of potential species when you're looking at a field guide and narrow it in really, really quickly. The next one is alternate. And again, you can see branches are staggered from each other. So I'm gonna just leave it there for right now and encourage you to go download the scavenger hunt here and start trying to find those. And I give some examples of common species under each one of those headings there. I do want to also share that if you're ready to go deeper with this right now, one of my favorite books for starting to understand the families, which is a great starting point for identification, is by by Thomas J. Elpel, and it's Botany in a Day. And it looks at the plant world through these patterns of the families. Phenomenal starting point. Now I'm going to leave you with two more bonus activities for today if you're really wanting to dive in and deepen your relationship. And the one is related to the fire activity. So a super fun activity you can do, if there's a place where you can go and make a fire legally and safely, then this is an activity that you'll be able to do. So go out to that spot and I want you to collect firewood from two different groupings of trees. I want you to make one fire completely out of coniferous trees. So for example, you're going to make the whole fire out of cedar branches. Make sure it's dead first. The second fire you're going to make out of a hardwood. So something like maple, ash, oak. And you're going to build both the fire structures at the same time and you're going to light them simultaneously and you're just going to watch and observe and see what you learn. And here's a few things to think about as you're watching them burn. Which one gets hottest the fastest? Which one throws the most smoke? Which one throws the most sparks? Which ones do the coals last the longest? And of the coals, which one has hotter coals? But starting to learn these properties can really increase your game and your skills in the outdoors, build your relationship with the trees a lot deeper, and it's also, again, a really neat way to just kind of impress your friends out on that next camp outing. The other bonus activity that's kind of fun if you want to do, and if you're in a place where you're not able to make fires, then this is one you might be able to do. Now, first off, to do this activity, you need to know if there's any trees that are poisonous to touch. Where I live, there's no trees that I have to worry about touching. You know, they might give me a little mild rash or something, but there's nothing that's really damaging or hurtful about them. Getting to know trees without the use of our eyes is such a fascinating thing as well, because each one of these has a slightly different smell. It has a slightly different texture. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go and sample some of these trees. So blindfold a friend, you do this one with a partner, and bring them up to a tree and then have them touch it and feel it with their hand, have them smell it. Sometimes if you just rub it in your fingers and then smell your fingers, you get a little bit better smell on there as the oils come off, and really explore it with all of your senses. This is such a fun way to get to know those trees a little bit deeper when you take our vision away as well. So I hope you enjoyed those activities and you're gonna go give some of them a try. Once you start to learn how to identify the trees and get really comfortable with them, then it just opens up this really amazing world, and suddenly those trees become a nice companion or friend on those long, cold, dark winter nights. Whether it's sitting up by a fire to keep you warm, or it's learning how to put some of those teas into your tea to just nourish you and keep you healthy in the wintertime. From there, you know, you can get into all kinds of things, whether it's learning how to make baskets and ropes, it's food and medicine, it's the art of fire making, it's the art of building, and then it's just the plain enjoyment of the trees and all the value that they bring to the entire ecosystem and the entire world. Now let's chat birds a little bit. I left you hanging this whole time. So in our last video, I played two different bird calls, and the first one was this one here. And now I mentioned that this bird, one of the ID features, so you can ID it even from a long ways away, is it flies in this undulating pattern. And this is a really tiny bird that can be found across a lot of North America, can be found both in urban environments as well as northern wilderness environments. And this is the American goldfinch. I love that little call. And one of the memory tricks that I use is, to me, it sounds like the goldfinch is saying, potato chip, chip in its call. Listen to that one more time. So the kind of analogy that I use to connect the dots there is I think about the goldfinch as this tiny little potato chip flying through the sky. So when I hear the potato chip call, it reminds me of the goldfinch. The two videos we've done so far in this series focused on bird language and bird communication and building a relationship with birds, and did the same with trees, building our relationships with the trees. The next video, in my opinion, is like the big game changer, and it really connects the dots between everything that's going on. It's when we start to dive into the realm of ecology, so not looking at things as individuals, but looking at them as part of the greater whole. And this is the art of tracking. Now, you might think about tracking as just being about identifying footprints, and I want to stretch your thoughts on that a little bit and say that that's really just the tip of the iceberg with tracking. Because yes, one part of tracking is learning to ID the footprints on the ground, but the next layer of that is recognizing that there's a story being written in those tracks. And that story interacts with everything else in the world. It interacts with the birds, it interacts with the trees, with the weather, with the seasons, with the people. It's such a beautifully rich story. And becoming a tracker is increasing your ability to actually read and interpret that story. So when you look at a string of tracks, it's actually like reading a storybook. The last thing I'd like to do before you go is invite you to connect with this amazing growing community we have building. They're people that are like-minded in their love of the outdoors, people that care about each other, people that care about the environment, and people that see the value in having a deep relationship with the other species that we share this planet with. Now, there's going to be lots of opportunities coming up to connect with this community more deeply, but for right now, the one way you can connect is to go down into the comments and engage down there. So I would love to hear what your top takeaway is or lesson from today's video, any questions you have down there. And if you want to share your thoughts on some of those mystery questions, maybe it's which one of the coniferous trees drops its needles, so the deciduous coniferous, or you want to share your thoughts on the firewood question, or just a cool story about trees or birds, please share those in the comments down below. Other than that, stay tuned for our next video on tracking, where we really wrap the bundle.